In this episode, I'm joined by Meik Wiking, who makes a welcome return to the podcast to talk about how we can make our homes happy ones. Meik is one of the world's most influential happiness researchers. He is the CEO of the Happiness Research Institute and a New York Times bestselling author.
Just starting to observe when you are in different places, whether that's the home of your friends or family or public places. How does this place make me feel? Because where you are, the surroundings, your environment, the design of a place will impact how you feel. So start to observe that and then consider, okay, what can I copy from this room where I feel good at home?
It's always such a pleasure when people return to the podcast, and especially so with this conversation with Meik Wiking. I'm excited for you to hear this conversation because Meik's first visit, way back in 2019, was a general conversation about happiness, the research he does at his institute, and the shift in the conversation that was happening at the time, all over the world, to find these moments of happiness in times of stress. Then, in 2020, things changed for everyone. The world shut down and life was just different. We all spent much more time in our homes, so it's fitting then that Meik has written a book and has focused a lot of the Institute's attention on how to make our homes a happy sanctuary. This isn't interior design, by the way. This is so much more, as Meik explains during our conversation. So if you want to make your home a more welcoming place for you and the people you love, then I think Meik's insights are exactly what you're looking for. So it's all here. Welcome to the show. Well, this is one of my favorite things, listeners, because I am welcoming back a guest to the podcast. It is Meik Wiking, who is the CEO of the Happiness Research Institute. But what I often do with guests before we start recording is say, would you just mind reminding me what your title is, just in case things have changed? Meik told me that he wrote his own contract. So please tell listeners what your full title is that you put in your own contract, because this is fantastic.
So yeah, my full title, I don't think I've shared this before, but it is CEO of the Happiness Research Institute, Chief Viking, and Lord of the Dragons. Because why not?
I mean,
but usually I just use the CEO of the Happiness Research Institute.
Do you know, but it's so good to have that in your back pocket to kind of pull out, isn't it? I'm now really reconsidering how maybe I need new business cards. I have to think of something as imaginative. Although I think you've bested everyone with that, because that really is fantastic. You are joining me again on the show. We had a brilliant conversation last time we saw each other. And we were just reminiscing, listeners, that it was on the top floor, I think it was, of a building in central London. And it was about 9 months before the world fundamentally changed.
Right.
So we talked about happiness. We talked about your book, all about Hygge. Am I saying it right?
You nailed it. Well done.
I always worry about pronunciations and what have you. But you have a Happiness Research Institute, so you are constantly researching happiness. But I'm guessing that what happened in 2020 and the subsequent 18 months, and obviously the trickle down that we've had from that, has changed, I guess, your research fundamentally. Because it's just the world just went on its head.
It hasn't changed what I'm researching because as you say, I mean, I research happiness. I created the Happiness Research Institute 10 years ago. And I think in the past 10 years and in the next, let's say 30, 40 years, I'm going to work with the same three basic questions. I try to understand together with my colleagues, how do we measure happiness and the good life? Secondly, why are some people happier than others? And thirdly, what can we do to improve quality of life? So my career is dedicated to those questions. That's what goes into our reports, our lectures, my books, the Happiness Museum that we opened in Copenhagen. So that hasn't changed. But of course, I think a lot of us now recognize to a larger extent, because of the pandemic, because of a war on European soil, that it's a turbulent world. And what can help us there is to sort of distinguish between areas and domains and events that I have control or no control over. And that is something I've tried to harness for the past couple of years. And that was also part of the sort of motivation for this book, because we spend the majority of our time indoors. A lot of us spend up to 70% of our time in our homes. That was even before the pandemic. I think we spend even more time these days in our homes. And to quote one of your countrymen, we shape our buildings and then they shape us. So I was really interested in seeing how can we sort of harness the architecture of happiness? How can we shape places that has a positive impact on our well-being? And that was the sort of whole motivation for the new book.
During the pandemic, did you feel that people were more inquisitive about happiness than they had been before? Do you think it was something that perhaps people not necessarily took for granted, but didn't interrogate? And then when they had so much more time, they actually had more time to think about, well, what does make me happy?
Right. No, I think you're right. I think there is an increased focus on mental health, on happiness from people, but fortunately also from companies. I think more companies these days are recognizing the importance of mental health in caring for your workers, understanding that we actually need to make offices nice places to spend time in order for people to come into them. Of course, we also saw during the pandemic different sort of developments for people. Some became less happy during the pandemic for obvious reasons, if they lost their job or if they lost loved ones, became sick. But we also saw some people actually thrive during the pandemic. People who had a long commute, 2 hours per day to go to work. Suddenly, if they were able to work from home, suddenly found more time in their every day. So we saw also different developments in terms of well-being. But yeah, mental health, I think, have had an increased focus in the past couple of years. And I think also an increased focus in the importance of stacking the deck in our favor when it comes to our homes and in our happiness. That is also part of the work that we do at the Happiness Research Institute, understanding how can we change the way we design our cities, our streets, our homes, so they have a positive impact on our well-being.
And I really want to come onto that in a second, because the new book, My Hygge Home, is really fascinating, and exactly that, how to make your home your happy place. It's about creating a sanctuary, really. But I do want to talk to you about mental health now that you've brought it up, because it strikes me sometimes that we are really focused on problems. So if I'm on the train in the morning, say I'm commuting into London, and I open up Twitter, I might be fed tweets from magazines saying how to know if you're depressed, or how to know if you're burnt out, how to know if you're overwhelmed. I'm probably not going to be fed, and it's not because of the algorithm, because of what I'm looking at, articles saying, here's 5 things that prove you're happy. Here are 5 things to say that your mental health you're doing good things for your mental health. So it's this sort of weird balance, isn't it? We're being signposted a lot to identify the things that might be bringing us down, and which I guess is the antithesis of what you do in your work.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I deal with the full spectrum in terms of happiness, but exactly what you're describing there is what the sort of tradition or school of positive psychology grew out of. People starting asking questions within psychology, saying, why are we only focusing on sort of the issues? Why are we focusing on the sort of dark sides? Why are we only focusing on negative emotions? Shouldn't we also care about what makes people thrive? What makes people happy? What makes them feel a sense of purpose and meaning in life? And the whole sort of happiness research domain grew out of that questioning. Of course, we deal with sort of all areas of the spectrum in terms of happiness. And that's also, to me, that's also part of life. Hopefully we experience good times and happiness and joy. But from time to time, we also experience unhappiness and worry and stress and anxiousness. Happiness researchers do that too. On Thursday, coming over to London from Copenhagen, I missed my flight. I spent 6 hours with a 1-year-old in the airport. It wasn't the best day ever. And that's part of the human experience, right? We have good days and we have bad days. I think my job is to understand how do we create good conditions for us to thrive. But in any human life, there's going to be ups and downs.
I really do want to talk about that in reference to my own mental health in terms of depression, anxiety, and how it links to my home. We can talk about that in a second. But I can confess and confide in you that I really felt like I got myself to a positive place. I felt like I was in a real groove. And I was really grateful a lot of the time for the fact that I very much could look at myself in the mirror and say, I'm not struggling with my mental health at the moment. If something happens, and had that happened 3 years ago, it would have floored me. And now it just it doesn't affect me so much. But recently I've made some quite big changes. And I wanted to throw a few things in the air and grow, like with this podcast, for example. I've made a few changes, and it ended up that I threw more balls in the air than I was really expecting. And being out of that happiness groove that I got myself into has been so unsettling and discombobulating that
What does discombobulating mean?
Well, just meaning that I felt like I lost a sense of like I'd lost that connection with that calm feeling, seeing the happiness. I was beginning to see the badness more. And I can rationalize it and say, well, a few years ago, I didn't have anything to lose and I've made these big changes and I've got a lot more to lose this time. But the thing I keep coming back to, which sort of connects with what you were saying, is that I can say, well, this is part of the experience and I have to go through this because I don't want to stay the same. I want to grow, and that involves growing pains. And so I'm just going to wear it. But coming round to thinking that way, it actually surprised me that it was as hard as it was.
But I think that makes a lot of sense. And courage is not doing stuff that you're comfortable with. It's doing stuff that scares you and still going ahead with it. And I think you said it spot on. It's how you grow as an individual. And I think also that's quite ingrained in us as humans, that we push boundaries and we move out of our comfort zone. I think that's how we have developed as humans. It can also be something that sort of undermines from time to time our unhappiness, that we're constantly sort of raising the bar for ourselves. In happiness research, we often talk about the hedonic treadmill. That we're happy once we achieve a goal, but then soon thereafter we set another goal, and so sort of we're constantly raising the bar for what we need, I think, in order to be happy. So I think it's good to be mindful of that. I think it's good to be aware of that, and knowing there is no one destination, there is no one accomplishment that is going to make you permanently happy.
I think that's it. I think for a long time I thought it was a destination, and I thought everyone was further towards it than I was. And even that made me unhappy. It was like, oh, well, I'm already on the back foot. Everyone else is going to get there. And I'm the sad sap who missed that day at school and hasn't figured out how to be happy. Right. And it is an inside job. And also with comfort zones, one of the things I was able to sort of do to myself was say, well, if you'd kept things the same, the seed of unhappiness had already been planted, or it wasn't even unhappiness, it was dissatisfaction that would probably grow into unhappiness. So comfort zones, I would be really interested to know your position on them. I think they're things that we can aspire towards or think are a good place to get to, but actually a comfort zone can be limiting, would you say?
I mean, the last time we had this chat, I had just written The Art of Making Memories. And if we're interested in a memorable life, from time to time, we have to do stuff that scares us. because that's a more memorable experience. Now, 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to sit in a Ferrari, in a Formula One car with he's a race car driver, Charles Leclerc, and he had a special Formula One car design. So there's 2 passengers in the back, and you are wearing sort of fireproof underwear, and of course a helmet and a suit, and you have I think it's called a panic button or dead man's button. So you have to press it down. If you release it, he knows there's something wrong or you passed out. And we're going around a racetrack with 300 kilometers an hour. And of course, I knew I would be scared. I'm not into cars. I'm not generally into speed. But I knew this would be a memorable experience. And I think I felt obliged as a happiness researcher to understand what's the thrill, what's the joy of it. Personally, but that I was definitely out of my comfort zone.
Oh, do you mind saying that one more time? You just cut out ever so slightly then.
The happiness I found in the whole experience was just surviving the darn thing. But I, it was definitely out of my comfort zone, but it was definitely also a memorable experience and something I'm going to remember for the rest of my life. So yeah, there is comfort in the comfort zone, but there's more memorability in being outside of your comfort zone. And I think also, the whole reason why I started the Happiness Research Institute also links into sort of this theme, because I got the idea for the Happiness Research Institute 10 years ago. I was working for a think tank on sustainability. I've been there for 7 years. It was a stable, well-paying job. It was definitely the comfort zone professionally. And then one evening I saw a report. I was in the office and I saw something called the World Happiness Report that had just come out, commissioned by the UN. And there was a ranking of 155 countries, their happiness levels. And Denmark was in first place. And I thought, why is Denmark always doing well in these happiness rankings? There should be somebody exploring this. There should be somebody creating a think tank on happiness in Denmark. And then I thought, maybe I should do that. And I just couldn't let go of that thought. And I was laying awake at night thinking about all the different sort of studies you could do within this field. But that was definitely out of my comfort zone. I hadn't thought I would start a company on my own. And this was, 2012, in the wake of the financial crisis, it was definitely financially uncertain and not in a very sort of comfort sort of zone financially. But I just really wanted to work with this field. And also the personal side of the story was I had a mentor at the company I was working for who I really looked up to in many ways, professionally, privately. And he unfortunately got very ill and died also that year. And my own mother had also died when she was 49. He died when he was 49. And I just started to reflect, okay, I have 15 years left at that time until I would be 49. What do you want to do with your 15 years? You want to stay here at this company, which is fine, but you're not passionate about it? Or you want to go out of your comfort zone and try and establish this thing that you can sense you have a lot of passion about and you find a lot of energy in. And in a matter of 2 months, I had quit my stable comfort job and started out with what I thought was a good idea and a bad laptop. And that is going to be the best decision that I'm going to make in my career. And yes, it did mean that I had to spend a couple of months on my friend's couch, when I was struggling to make ends meet when we were first starting out. But it definitely grew me professionally. I'm definitely happier now than I was 10 years ago. So sometimes being out of our comfort zone, I think has certainly some positive effects.
That actually brings me on to a question that it's been bugging me recently, not bugging me, but a lot of people talk about, and I've even done it. I've talked about when I had a sales job in my early 20s and I had an epiphany when I went to New York. I don't want to spend the rest of my life doing sales. So I'm going to go and I'm going to train and become a journalist. And I was too late to do it. All of the things were stacked against me. And I hear a lot of these stories of I went from the thing that was safe or was mundane and wasn't making me happy, but maybe paid me a lot of money or I was comfortable. And I took the risk and I jumped. And I think sometimes we can tell that story and it's like, yay. But that day one is really terrifying because ultimately, yes, okay, that's part of it. But the other part of it is monetizing it in the sense of you have to put a roof over your head. You have to keep yourself safe and warm, which again brings us neatly into what we're going to be talking about in a second. And so that's a brilliant story and I absolutely love it. But I would, if you wouldn't mind, I would love you to expand on, well, what was that? Was there a business plan? What were your expectations for, I know I have to do this research, but I also know that I have to make a living?
There was no business plan. I hadn't had a single conversation with a potential client. I hadn't had a single conversation with a potential researcher. There was just a lot of interest and desire to research this field. And fortunately, the gamble paid off. But I've also had other gambles that didn't pay off. When I was in my early 20s, I went to Spain for 3 months to write a book, and I did finish the book, and it's terrible. But I still had 3 quite memorable months in Spain, in a small village.
Memories again.
So I mean, and I think it's also later in life that you discover and realize that some of the failures you had earlier in life can actually be turned into a positive thing now. I mean, some of the weirder jobs and stuff that I've done in the past have also helped me do what I do now. So I think like Steve Jobs said in his sort of famous commencement speech, it's later in life you are able to connect the dots that you created earlier in life. And as the years go by, I see that I see the truth in that. So I think it's early in life, try out stuff, experiment, fail, and then later in life you will be able to convert those failures into experience that actually helps you achieve some of the goals that you set for yourself.
I think that's brilliant advice for anyone who's listening to this podcast who maybe is in their 20s or at the beginning of a career and is petrified or terrified of putting a foot wrong. Because I know I was, I'm sure lots of people listening can relate to this. Actually, you don't even need to be in your 20s and 30s, just starting out on anything, actually embracing the failures so that when you do fall flat on your face, you get up laughing, knowing that that's a big lesson. And what's on the other side of it can only be better than where you were before.
Yeah, exactly. And also coming back to your other question, sort of financially, I had lived frugally when I was working and saved up a bit of money, and I knew I could start the company and do that for at least a year without sending the first invoice. And that gave me a bit of sort of security in terms of, okay, let's try it out. The worst thing, I'll have to find a job in a year's time. I think for me, the bigger risk was dreaming about it, not doing it, and then perhaps seeing somebody else run with that dream and achieve it. So I just really wanted to work with this field. So that was a scarier scenario for me, not having a go at what I thought would be an amazing journey.
Yeah, it's that interrogation, isn't it? It's asking yourself those questions. A friend of mine recently was offered an incredible job, but was very on the fence about it. Like on paper, amazing, but in real life, there were things that were getting in the way of her decision making. And then we had a glass of wine and I said, okay, you see the announcement go up that the job has been taken and it's not you. How do you feel? And she just pulled out her phone and wrote back and accepted the role because she said, that was what I needed to hear. there was something, I didn't want anyone else to have it. That's for damn sure. I knew I wanted it. So it can be interesting just to flip those perspectives.
Yeah.
So my Hygge home, how to make your home your happy place. I'll tell you my little story about home, that actually when I started opening the pages of the book, I felt quite transported back to a dark place, because it made me realize I had depression and anxiety, and the flat that I was living in at the time was dark. And when I think back to those memories, those bad memories, I can feel the darkness, and I can feel it being quite enclosed. And when I was getting better and doing therapy and what have you, I wanted to move. And one of my non-negotiables was light. So, I mean, you can see behind me, that's floor to ceiling windows I've got right there, because that was a non-negotiable. And I've read the odd thing, but it was more of an instinctive thing of, I need light, I need to see light, I need there to be light. And that really is something that you explore in the book as well, isn't it? About the different types of light that you can curate to actually create a happy mind, which I totally believe in.
It's a super relevant example. And you're not alone. I mean, we can see the World Health Organizations have done studies that show if you have inadequate daylight in your home, you are more likely, or you're more in risk of becoming depressed. And I think that, like you, a lot of us know it intuitively, but I think it's really important also that we get data on it and studies that also help policymakers and people in the building industry understand the importance of daylight. And we can see also in Denmark, people who have access to daylight, who work outside, are less likely to become depressed. We see in the largest hospital in Denmark, when people are submitted with depression at the hospital, there is a difference on how long they stay there, depending on whether they're in south-facing or north-facing rooms. So we are northern country, so naturally we have more daylight in south-facing rooms than north-facing rooms. And at the Rigshospitalet, which is the main hospital in Copenhagen, there's a study there that showed that on average, patients in the south-facing rooms spend 29 days. In the north-facing rooms, they spend 59 days. So now they're doing experiments with artificial light that's sort of dynamic, that follows the natural light of the day. So I think it's an overlooked area in mental health. And I think a lot of us perhaps take it a little bit too much for granted. And lighting is tremendously important in your home, in how it sets the atmosphere. And it's also something that you know is quite achievable and sort of a simple hack. So in my room, I basically just act like a cat and follow the light around, right? So in the morning, I have great lighting at my work desk that is facing the street side of the house, and in the afternoon, I need to go to the other side of the house and further up where there's better lighting. So daylight, tremendously important. And that was in part the seed that planted the idea for the book, combined with a story I heard from a Canadian reader who had read my first book around Hygge. I think I also share this in the book, but he read about Hygge, and lighting is a big part of Hygge, and candles are tremendously important because they give up this nice, soft, warm light that Hygge is all about. And so this Canadian guy, he went out and he bought some candle holders, and he started to light candles for dinner at home with his family. And him and his wife, they have 3 teenage sons. So when their dad, they started to light candles for dinner, the boys, they started to tease their dad, right? So, Dad, what's going on? You know, well, you want to have some romantic time with Mom? Should we leave? But he told me eventually the boys, they started to light candles for dinner. And it became this ritual of food and fire that brought their family together. And I was really happy that he told me their family dinners now last 20 minutes longer. Because the candles, the atmosphere changes the boys' mood. now they're in a storytelling mode. Instead of just sitting down and eating their food as fast as they can, they sit down, they sip their wine, they talk about their day. And I thought, isn't it interesting that a simple change, a simple design hack like a candle, changes how a family interacts? What else can we do that has positive impact on our well-being when it comes to design? When we shape our homes, and then they impact how we feel and how we act. We know that from a lot of studies. There's the impact of daylight on your mental health. There's also a really cool study conducted here in the UK, the UK Millennial Cohort Study, that have followed kids that were born around the year 2000 and followed them in their childhood and now into adulthood. And they can see from that study, 50% of the kids, when they are 7, have a TV in their bedroom. 4 years later, when the kids are 11, the 50% that had a TV in their bedroom are 25% more likely to be obese. So it's a simple thing like a TV. And what other things I started to say, can we do that stack the deck in our favor when it comes to happiness? What other design hacks can we harness so we get a benefit of an environment that actually helps us make the choices we want to make and have a positive impact on our well-being?
I was interested
I was just saying that's what the book is about.
So I was interested when I saw the link between children having a television in their bedroom and obesity, and then an implied link to perhaps that would impact their happiness, because that's quite, I mean, let's face it, that's quite controversial to suggest that obesity leads to being unhappy. Would you say that is a link and I shouldn't call it controversial?
No, I haven't seen studies that suggest that link. It's very much, I think, a matter of social comparisons. So it all comes down to how does the kid feel about him or herself. So no, there's no necessarily mental or link between that physical health and mental health as far as I am aware of. But of course, there are sort of physical consequences in terms of physical health.
Okay, so I guess that the television is making that child more sedentary so that they're not moving around as much? Or, I mean, the thing is, television in the bedroom, exactly. How can you compare that to a device that they're holding all the time? Because that has an impact too, I would imagine.
Yeah. And I think, this was kids brought up around the year 2000. I think we would see a different result today because devices are now much more common in your hand than they were in the early 2000s. But another sort of core theme in the book is how do we turn a house into a home? And that is actually a question that have been asked in the UK. And I thought it was really interesting to see that there is no furniture, there's no things, there's no stuff mentioned in the top 5. So the first item you see on the list is on 7th place. It's a sofa. But the first thing people mention that turns a house into a home is happiness, it's love, it's a sense of belonging, and then it's the sound of laughter, having friends and family over for dinner, and the smell of good food cooking. And the more I get into my sort of research and happiness in general, the more I see that also being a core question. How do we connect better with loved ones, family, friends, and also with neighbors? And that's also a quite central theme in the book. And of course, the Canadian family example is one element. Adding a candlelight can impact how long a family dinner lasts. I really like the design hack of serving artichokes from time to time, because it has a really good prep time to eating time, or eating time to prep time ratio. Because I can prepare artichokes in 1 minute. I get the water boiling, add salt, half a lemon, and the artichokes then cook for 40 minutes. But it takes a long time to eat the artichokes, right? Because you have to peel off each leaf individually. So I'm a nerdy numbers guy. So I of course have measured how long our family dinners on average are. And when we have artichokes, they are 12 minutes longer. So it gives me a long dinner and little prep time. So stuff like that I'm really interested in, little design hacks. And also now I know, at least in Denmark, but I know also in the UK, prices of food are rising with inflation going up. So how can we eat better in a sort of social way, but also sort of, budget-friendly way? And I know that the average UK household throw out £700 worth of food each year. And that was pre-pandemic prices. So what I do at home is I have a retirement shelf or a hospice shelf in my fridge. So on that shelf are food I need to eat or we need to eat in the next day or two. So it's not hidden behind the jam on the top shelf. It's not somewhere in a drawer. It's the first thing I see when I open the fridge. Okay, those red peppers, that salmon, we need to finish that in the next lunch or in the next dinner. So I work those ingredients in, and that help us really reduce food waste. So I think that's another sort of simple hack. And to me, Hygge is about achieving the good life on a low budget. So it's tips like that I'm trying to convey.
See, that's just making me think of the person who comes home, crappy day at work, the boss has been a bit of a pain. You open the fridge, you're not looking to be sustainable. You're not looking to save food. You are looking to be comforted. And sometimes the perishables, the vegetables, aren't going to do the job. But that, I mean, one can switch the way they think about those things, can't they? And I think it is about what you attach your happiness to. So yeah, when I read that, I just kind of thought, I wonder, I understand that and I love it. But is that shelf going to win over the bad day that I've had for the last 9 hours?
Not necessarily, but it will help you on some days, right? It will give you a better chance of utilizing those groceries than if you were spreading them out on different shelves and having the red peppers behind the strawberry jam on the top shelf that you find 2 weeks from now, and then you have to clean that shelf. So it's giving yourself better odds of achieving what you want to achieve. To me, it's also making life a little easier. So on my phone, I always have a list of what I have in my freezer, because you probably know you have some leftover, let's say bolognese, and you put it in a bag or in a container, and you put it in the fridge, and you think, I know this is bolognese. I will know this is bolognese the next time I see it. But 3 months from now, you have added 3 other bags with brown stuff in it, and you don't know what is what, and you end up throwing it all. But I can now go on my phone and I can say, okay, in my freezer at home, we have some rosé, a leftover bottle that we froze down, and now I can use that in a stew at some point. There's some chicken, there's some red curry, and some peas, and there's some gooseberries and other stuff. But the red curry, the peas, and the chicken, I can already use that in a new curry, right? Mm-hmm. So actually, when we come home to Copenhagen, I actually don't need to go shopping because we already have everything we need for dinner that night. And that just makes life a little easier, especially when you're coming home from the airport with a 1-year-old. Yeah. So it's stuff like that I think we can do little things that just helps us live better, easier.
Mm. Now, you've mentioned that the fact that prices are going up in the UK, but I wanted to ask you about a particular, I've been told this is a quirk of mine. It doesn't feel like a quirk to me. It comes back to light. So as part of the podcast, I've been doing this thing called 12 Habits. And it's basically trying to try something out for a month, live a certain way, try it on, see how it works. And a couple of months ago, I woke up every day at 5 a.m. because it was just a little bit early. It's just put a little bit of a pinch on the idea of an early start. And it took about 2 weeks to get into it. But I think I did it in July, when the sun is up. And I have to be honest, Mike, I freaking love it. And actually, I get up at 5 a.m. every day now still. It actually helps me feel as though I've got a really good head start on the day, so I never feel overwhelmed. But that's another story. But we have moved on. And when I wake up now at 5 a.m., it is pitch black. And it is probably pitch black until about 6:45-ish. It has really changed. And when I wake up, a bedside table light goes on, but no other light. So when I go into my living room, I'll put on the TV and I will start working out, but there is no light on anywhere. Because for me, if I put the lights on, I don't think, I've probably, in the time I've lived in this flat, which is over 3 years now, just after I saw you, I think I've had the main lights on in the living room maybe 4 times.
Okay.
I always have to have low light.
Right.
And this is just my way. Is that a quirk or is that actually quite a good idea?
I don't think it's a quirk. I think it's just your habit. And it's a lovely quirk if it is a quirk. But listen, but you're hammering on the point that I'm also trying to make in the book, is that lighting matters. We talked about the importance of daylight in terms of your mental health. We talked about the Canadian family with the candles for dinner. But there's also studies that have been done in Danish primary schools that show that the lighting in the room affects how the kids act and how noisy they are. So in some rooms, they have a sort of white overhead uniform lights, harsh, bright. And in some rooms, they have, like you have in the morning, perhaps not in the schoolroom bedside lamps, but table lamps and an overhead or a downward facing light on the table. So what the teachers describe is that light facing down on the table brings the kid up to the table instead of rolling around crazy on the floors, and gives it a more homey, calming atmosphere. And they measured the noise levels on decibels in the different classrooms. And with the lighting, with the pockets of light, the pools of light, the islands of light rooms, the noise reduction is up to 6 decibels. And I didn't know what that was, but that means going from the noise level you have when you're having a conversation in a restaurant to the conversation you have at home. So it's quite significant. So yes, lighting matters. It impacts how we feel. It impacts how we act. So I don't think it's a quirk. I think it's a good idea.
I just find overhead lighting incredibly aggressive, especially in the morning. It reminds me of getting up in the middle of the night as a kid to get up to go to the airport or something, or being pulled out of a routine for a reason. So yeah, there is just, particularly as you've seen floor to ceiling windows, I will let the light come up from outside, and I love that. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, and in Denmark we have an expression. If you have that sort of the light you described there, the bedside table light, or if you have candles or something, not the white harsh uniform light, because the first kind of lighting makes people look nicer. We call it looking grotto fabulous. So it's also good for our sort of self-confidence, I think.
Oh God, maybe it has more to do with my vanity than anything else, than my mood. The other thing that I adore in my home, I wouldn't say I'm particularly, I'm not one of these people who follows lots of interior accounts and goes, oh, that design is fantastic. I like what I like, and I'm not really that discerning. But I think if there were 2 things that if you took them out of my living room now, they would both be as impactful to how the room looked. The first is the sofa, which we know is in that top 10 on that list. The second is all my plants.
Yeah. I would agree. I think that's one of the simplest, quickest, perhaps cheapest way we can quickly transform our homes and sort of increase the Hygge factor is to add plants, add plants. And again, several studies show the positive impact of nature or access to nature or plants to your both physical and mental health. You have really good studies in the UK actually on happiness. There's a cool study called Happiness where people have been using their phone and they're asked 1, 2, or 3 times per day how happy they are right now. And we would follow you and 10,000 of your listeners over a period of time. And then we would see, okay, every time Emma is in nature, she's happier than when she's in an urban environment. You're also happy on Fridays and Saturdays than you are on Mondays and Tuesdays, by the way. But for unsurprising reasons. So we can see when people are in green areas, when they're in the countryside, they're typically happier. And again, there's also been experiments or studies conducted in hospitals. People recover quicker quicklier. Is that a word? No.
Let's make it one. I like it.
People will recover quicker from surgery when they have a view of green areas compared to urban. So the whole biophilia research area, I think, is really interesting, and something I think we can also harness when we are designing our homes. But I think you're hitting on an important point too, in terms of saying not so much into design and sort of latest trends. And that's also my hope with this book, that it's less about furniture and more about how we interact with the people that are sitting in that furniture. I really like the sort of a principle in the book I call the extra chair principle, that I learned about when a few years ago we were studying groups of young people and their well-being, and the young people were engaged in different after-school activities. They were singing, and they were dancing, and they were playing sports, and some of the pupils we followed, they were engaged in something called live action role-playing games. So Dungeons and Dragons, swords in the forest, and orcs and elves and whatnot. And we followed them over time, and we looked at their, sense of connection, self-esteem, happiness levels. And we could just see that the kids involved in the live action role-playing games were developing really well. A stronger sense of connection, feeling that they had good friends. And then we started to see what is it that this group of organizers are doing right. And we understood that when they organized meetings and had the kids over to plan these events, they had some principles like the extra chair principle, which was when, let's say, you and I to make sure there is an extra...
Oh, I lost you for a second there. After the extra chair thing, let's say you and I.
Yeah. So let's say you and I were sitting at a table, and you and I then have the responsibility to make sure there is an extra empty chair at the table, so it's easy for somebody to join the conversation. And it was so ingrained in their culture and the way they sort of organized social events. Also, if three people, you and I and a third person, is standing talking, they would open up, instead of being sort of a closed triangle, they would open up how we were standing, so it would be easy for a fourth person to enter that circle. And this was sort of core in the social interaction with the kids. So it was a environment that was very inclusive. And I think that's a wonderful principle to keep in mind when we are in a social setting. So to me, that's also what design is about. It's not just about the sort of colors on the wall, but it's how we design social experiences for our friends and family as well.
Yeah, and I have to say, I'd be lying if I said that when I was going through the book, I didn't have a bit of a revelation about my own life and my own home, which is that my home has never been social. Growing up, the family home was very much about a retreat from my father from work, for my mother for work and whatever she was doing, and for my brother and I for school and whatever. It wasn't somewhere where we hosted a lot. That really is quite foreign to us, if I'm being honest, this idea of having people around. We don't have extended family or anything like that. And when I was reading the book, I was like, oh God, okay, yeah, it's really, if I invite someone over, it's not casual. It's actually quite a big deal for me because it's so far removed from my normal, if you like. And I was realizing, I think this is something that I need to make a much bigger effort to do, is actually to have people here. Because I had a friend here on Sunday and it was absolutely lovely. We just sit on the sofa drinking tea, have a good old chat. But basically what I'm saying is in looking at the book and how to make your home your happy place, I realized I don't instinctively do one of the most fundamental things that you encourage, which is invite people in.
I think that's part of it, but homes are also, I think, first and foremost, a place where we retreat. it's also to cater for a very human need of privacy. And I think we all need that. I think we need to recharge, we need to re-energize, and we do that in our homes. And so connection is important. Being social is important, but we also really need to understand the need for our sort of introverted side. I need that, and I think that's a sort of a common human need. So don't feel bad about that. And also, yes, it can be sometimes daunting to invite people over. What I sometimes like to do is I like to involve people in the cooking process. So I'm not responsible for getting all the dishes ready and everything is perfect at the right time. And I think that also makes it more hyggelig. It's the working together, and we have something to do with our hands, and we're helping each other out. And what I did a few years back was also we had a cooking club where we would meet and cook together. So we would have a theme, and then everybody would bring ingredients to cook under that theme. And one evening we chose the theme of sausages. And everybody had brought ingredients to make sausages. And I had made sure that we had some casings, and we were mincing the meat, and somebody had brought apple for the sausages, and somebody had tried to get camel meat and wasn't successful, and a lot of different sort of variations. Anyways, so we were cooking, we were mincing the meat, and we were sort of stuffing the sausages and boiling them and frying them and whatnot. And here we are, we have 6 people. We spent 3 hours cooking sausages. We sit down at the table, and we have these mountains of sausages, and we start eating, and the taste was absolutely horrible. And, and it's been half a decade, and we still talk about what went wrong with the sausage disaster of 2017.
The great sausage
disaster.
And
I think, again, it was a memorable night, and we had a good time, and maybe we left a little hungry, but I think that's fine from time to time. So I think that's a way, and we were all responsible for the horrible food. So I think that's also a way to take the pressure of a dinner party. That let's do this together and screw up together, or make a successful feast.
Yeah, I always learn a lot from you, Meik, and I do take away and I try to put things into action. But one thing that won't be leaving my inbox or my outbox is an email saying sausage party at mine, because it will definitely get the wrong impression. I will just live vicariously through your great sausage disaster. Okay, I do want to tap into privacy a bit, I guess, because it really speaks to my own experience, and maybe some listeners will identify with this too, because the thing I said about retreating, it's very easy to isolate yourself. And I think there are some times where you do it where you're recharging, and there are other times when you do it like I did it, where you begin to actually just cut yourself off from the world at large. And I don't know if you have any insights into where that line gets blurred and how to stay on the right side of it, so that you're just recharging and you're not hiding. I definitely have a propensity for the latter.
It is a tricky balance, but I think we have to start with understanding that we have both needs from time to time. I think we have a need to be social and to connect with other people, in a sense to belong. And I think a lot of us, even in the bigger cities, are seeking that sort of village feeling where we know the first name of our neighbors and are able to borrow a cup of sugar when we need that. But I think we all also have the basic need of connecting with ourselves and being alone and not getting additional input. Recently, we did a study of row houses in Denmark and the UK. We focused on that typology, and at the Happiness Research Institute. And in Copenhagen, one of the most popular areas you can live is something called, and you don't attempt to pronounce this word because you'll risk something. It's called Kartoffelrækkerne. But it literally means the potato rows. But it's 11 streets in central Copenhagen of terraced houses. I think they have the highest share of architects in Copenhagen living there. So they're quite coveted. And what is interesting about those homes is they have a tiny front garden. And that's where people go when they want to sort of be social. It's where they go for a cup of coffee, read the paper, say hi to their neighbor. And that's where you chat with the other people on the street. They also have a backyard. And being terraced houses, they are still really close to their neighbors in their backyard. In a lot of the gardens, backyards, you can still see the other neighbors. But there is a consensus, a culture that you don't talk to each other in the backyards. You might be able to see each other, but we ignore each other in the backyard. So that's where they go for privacy. And I think it's interesting. You have an entire neighborhood where that's the consensus. This is what we do because we all have this need to be outside in our personal space. So I think it's a common human thing. Not all of us have that luxury, but I think we need to understand that we have that need. Some people are living in a single household, then it's easier, and some people are living in families or in a couple. And sometimes, even though we love the other person, we also have that need to retreat. Some people then seek the kitchen or listen to podcast or something. But I think we need to understand that we have that need, and perhaps we need a conversation with the partner. It's not that I just love you, but when I get home from work, I need an hour where I'm just by myself, not talking, not sort of engaging. So I think there is sometimes a design opportunity in terms of how we design our homes or what we have in terms of outdoor, indoor space. But sometimes it could also be a cultural thing, like the sort of policies we set up in terms of what things do I need when I get home from work, for instance.
Yeah. Now, I've already said that I don't follow interiors accounts. Some of my friends, Meik, are obsessed, and they will tell you about the history of a certain type of sofa design or why these sorts of curtains. I actually went away with a friend recently, and she spent quite a lot of time looking at the curtains and how they were fitted. And she's like, "Oh, I wonder if I could do that in mine." And that's not where I am. But I tell you what I do follow. And I do think this is a fairly recent sort of upsurge in these sorts of accounts. And definitely with lockdown, they really had a bit of a growth spurt. And that is home organization.
Mm-hmm.
I have a carpet rake, and it makes me very, very happy. Like so many quirks I've shared with you. When I leave my bedroom in the morning, when I'm dressed, and then I won't be going back into the bedroom probably until much later on in the day, I rake myself out so that my first step into the room in the evening is like on fresh carpet. And I do the same with this office. When I leave this office, I just rake it, just so that when I open the door tomorrow, it's like it's fresh and brand new.
Right.
That's so important to me.
Listen, I'm Scandinavian, and it's the love of fresh snow, right, with no footsteps on it. So I get it. I completely get it. And also, I told you, right, we opened a Happiness Museum in Copenhagen a couple of years ago. And my favorite room in the museum is where we have asked people to write down on Post-its what happiness is to them. And there's a lot of different things, and there's also a lot of patterns. But there's one person who wrote that happiness is a good quality lawnmower and a big lawn to mow. And I think he gets the same sort of sense of satisfaction with sort of seeing, like you're seeing with the carpet, sort of the progress, the sort of, the calmness. So I don't think you are alone in that one, but we can call it a quirk. We can call that one a quirk.
No, I like it, but it's this sense of I really spend a lot of time, especially on TikTok, since I've discovered TikTok, like people getting the clear compartments, the drawers that they then put into a cupboard with a little drawer, and they've got these little labels on saying dishwasher tablets, washing tablets, or whatever it is, and right. It just everything looks so brand new and organized. And I was like, why am I obsessed with this? Why do I suddenly want to buy a load of Perspex drawers and put things in? And I guess it's this sense of, well, there's less thinking that I have to do at home.
Right.
because all the thinking's been done for me. It's one big effort, isn't it, to do a bit of a clear out and put things away and leave them where you know that they'll always be. So I guess it kind of means that you need less brain usage to just kind of navigate your space.
Yeah.
But there's also something incredibly comfortable about knowing you've got all of those things. Has that shown up in the research in terms of hygge and home?
I think it has, because a couple of years ago, we did a huge study at the Happiness Research Institute across 10 European countries with 13,000 homes, I think it was. And we looked at, how important homes are for your happiness, and found, yes, they are. And we also looked at what are the biggest barriers for people being happy with their homes. And one of the biggest barriers was that it felt cluttered. So if it feels spacious, if it is decluttered, then people were happier with their homes. So remember a few years ago, there was also a lot of hype around Marie Kondo that sort of talked about sort of decluttering the home. I think perhaps we can also do a little bit better and say, okay, what can we do to pre-clutter? What can we do not to bring basically crap into our homes that we don't need? And I think there's also different strategies for that. For example, if you want to bring something into your home, you have to bring something out of your home first, instead of just throwing more and more stuff in. Right?
One in, one out, like any good bouncer.
Exactly. Exactly. So, but I don't think you're alone in that one. I have a list on my phone what's in my freezer. So I also like to know what is where, right? So you're not alone.
No, but it does seem to be something that is not only aspirational because it looks really nice, but it has that link to the way that it makes you feel, which struck me as being quite interesting. I think there's something in the book as well that I wanted you to expand on about space and, is this right? Space and size.
Yeah.
So I can think of the amount of times I've lived in some very, very, very small spaces in my life. And there's constantly a yearning of like just being able to spread my wings or just have a bit more space. And it can even feel like that sometimes here. And it requires a declutter. And so but it is that interesting thing, isn't it? Like the clutter can actually feel claustrophobic, even though you don't necessarily put the link between the stuff that's around you being the thing that's making you feel confined.
Right. And you're exactly right. And that was actually from the same study I talked about before, the one across 10 countries with 13,000 people. We saw that size doesn't predict whether people are happy with their homes, but the sense of spaciousness does. So it's not the actual square meters or square footage, but it's how the place feels. So if you can declutter, if you can create a larger sense of space, that seems to have a positive impact on your happiness with your home and your overall well-being. So yeah, decluttering, pre-cluttering. I think that's a good first step if people want to achieve a more hygge home, but also a happier home.
Well, that was going to be my, as our time together draws to an end, I was going to say, right, can you give me 3 things, really easy things, whether it's a bit of advice for people to think on, ponder, or some actionable things. So we've started with the clutter is a thing to consider. Are there any other things that you'd want listeners to really take away?
I think understanding the importance of light, both daylight and artificial light. I think that's a quick also way to change how a room feels, is to understand and harness the power of light. And then thirdly, I think we need to get cooking more. I think I can see the majority of people in the UK wish there were more family and family dinners and dinner parties with friends. So we need to get cooking more. We need the artichokes. We need the hospice shelf, and we need the list of what's in your freezer on your phone. But I think also just starting to observe when you are in different places, whether that's the home of your friends or family or in public places, how does this place make me feel? Because where you are, the surroundings, your environment, the design of a place will impact how you feel. So start to observe that and then consider, okay, what can I copy from this room where I feel good at home? And start with the simple things, start with the cheap things. So that would be my advice.
I love it. It's always such a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for coming back on the show. Listeners, the link to the book, in fact, all of your books will be in the show notes. And I'll also link to Meik's social media and put the link into that museum so that anyone heading to CPH can go and hang out there and go and add their post-it of what happiness means to them. Thank you so much for coming back, Meik. It's been a joy.
Thank you, Emma. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.